A glass of cold water was thrown straight into my wife's face, right in the middle of our son's wedding reception. Not during a private argument, but in front of hundreds of guests raising their glasses in celebration. I heard my daughter-in-law speak. Her voice was calm, almost casual. "Sign it. Sell the tailoring shop. We need the money right now." Everyone thought I would explode. But I didn't move, because in that exact moment I understood something very clearly. This wedding was not a union. It was a transaction. Before the story goes any further, take a moment to subscribe and leave a comment about where you're listening from, at home, on the road, or in a quiet moment to yourself. Your presence is what keeps stories like this alive. As for me, I stood there in the middle of the wedding hall, wiping the water from my wife's face, and realizing that what was about to happen would be anything but simple. I didn't step forward right away. I didn't say a word. I simply pulled the handkerchief from my suit pocket, the one I've carried for years, and slowly wiped my wife's face. The cold water had soaked into her hair, her collar dampening the dress she had carefully prepared since early morning. Lisa trembled, not from the cold, but from humiliation. I could feel it clearly through the way her hand tightened around mine. The music outside kept playing. Laughter paused for half a second, then resumed as if no one wanted to be the first to admit what they had just witnessed. A luxurious wedding, an old riverside estate along the savannah, and in the middle of it all my wife stood there soaked and silent, like an extra detail in a perfectly staged scene. Emily set the empty glass down on the table. She wasn't flustered. She didn't apologize. She even adjusted her wedding dress as if worried a few drops of water might have ruined a photo. Her eyes passed over Lisa, then settled on me. Cold, direct. "We don't have all day," she said. "Where are the papers?" A waiter stepped forward, hesitated, then retreated when no one signaled him to continue. Jacob stood beside his wife. My son. His suit was custom tailored, flawless down to every stitch. I knew exactly where that suit came from, and I knew he never asked how much it cost. Jacob didn't look at his mother. He looked at me, as if I were the one causing an unnecessary delay. Then he reached into his inner pocket, pulled out a sleek black fountain pen, and placed it in my palm. "Dad, just sign it," he said. "It's only the tailoring shop. We don't need it anymore." I looked at the pen, a beautiful object. Too beautiful for hands like mine. Hands used to holding scissors and needles. Suddenly I remembered the late nights at the shop. Lisa repairing seams under the yellow lights. Me checking the books until my eyes burned. All of that, reduced to just a tailoring shop. Emily slid a stack of papers toward me. I didn't need to read them to know what they were. The sale of Heritage Stitch. Liquidation of all assets. Immediate cash payout. I skimmed the first few lines. Enough to recognize the name of a brokerage firm I knew very well. So familiar that I almost laughed. "We need to settle a few things," Emily continued, her voice even. "The honeymoon credit cards, some unexpected expenses." "You wouldn't want us starting our marriage with debt, would you?" Lisa shook her head slightly. She opened her mouth, her voice trembling. "That shop belonged to my parents. I just want to keep it a little longer." Emily turned to her eyes, sharpening. "Keep it for what?" "To stare at those old clothes for the rest of your life." The words fell softly, but loud enough for nearby guests to hear. A few people looked away. Some pretended to adjust their napkins. No one intervened. This was a high society wedding. People were used to quiet deals, just not to seeing them exposed in the middle of a celebration. Jacob sighed as if he were the one suffering the most. "Mom, don't make this more awkward," he said. "Emily's friends are watching." I looked at my son. I searched his face for hesitation, for shame. All I found was impatience. He wanted this over. He wanted the music back, the congratulations, the feeling of standing at the center of a life he believed he deserved. Lisa let go of my hand. She bent down, picked up a fallen napkin, wiped her face again, then stood up straight. No tears, no shouting. I knew that posture. It was how she had lived for years, silently enduring, hoping things would somehow fix themselves. I placed the pen back on the table, gently, as if afraid to scratch the wood. I folded the papers unsigned and slid them back toward Emily. "Not yet," I said. No one expected that. Emily raised an eyebrow. Jacob frowned. A few guests began paying closer attention. I felt a subtle shift in the air, like the second hand ticking into a new minute. "You're ruining our day," Emily said, forcing a thin smile. I nodded. Maybe. I turned to Lisa and placed my hand on her back. By then the shock was gone. What replaced it was a cold, steady clarity. I had been silent for too long, and that silence had convinced them I would always bow my head. The reception continued. But for me that moment closed a very long chapter and opened another one, a chapter where I no longer planned to sign anything just to keep the peace. I didn't go back to the reception table. I guided Lisa toward the edge of the garden where the lights hung lower and the music faded into a thin background hum. She didn't ask me anything. After decades together, Lisa knows exactly when I need silence. Her hand rested on my arm, light steady, a habit formed back when we were young. Standing there, something became clear to me, something I had avoided for a long time. What happened today didn't start with that glass of cold water. It had been prepared slowly, step by step in the dark. Years ago, when Jacob had just graduated, he came to me on a rainy evening. He talked about big opportunities, fast investments, new friends. I listened. I nodded, and after he left, I quietly called the bank. One debt was handled. One name was removed from the overdue list. Jacob never knew. To him, things had simply worked out. Then it happened again, and again. Each time the story changed, but the ending stayed the same. I stood in the background like a shadow signing papers no one ever saw, moving money through intermediary accounts under the name anonymous sponsor. I didn't do it for gratitude. I did it because I believed that was a father's duty. Until Emily appeared. From the first meeting, I noticed how her eyes never lingered on people's faces. They swept past and stopped on details. Watches, shoes, space, position. It was the gaze of someone always calculating, always measuring the value around her. After the engagement, the questions began. Not directly, always wrapped in suggestions. "Are you and Mom planning to fully retire? That tailoring shop is in such a prime location. I'm sure people have asked about buying it." I gave vague answers. I thought I was keeping things private. In truth, I was only giving them time. I stepped farther away, leaving Lisa seated on a stone bench. I took out my phone. While the wedding went on, others were working. This wasn't the first time I had called them. I had reached out earlier. The moment I saw the brokerage name on the papers, Emily pushed toward me. A brief report appeared on the screen. Clearer than I expected. Emily had met privately with a real estate broker 3 months earlier, not to test the market, but to seal a verbal agreement. The tailoring shop's land would be sold immediately after the wedding at a price far higher than what she had told Jacob. The difference would be routed through an account under a relative's name. Jacob didn't know. Or maybe he didn't want to know. I turned off the screen. In my mind, scattered pieces suddenly fell into place. The urgency, the pressure to sign on the wedding day. That glass of cold water wasn't a loss of control. It was the final push. Another memory surfaced, forcing me to breathe deeper. Not long ago, I noticed one corner of the shop's storage was empty. The silk fabric rolls I had saved for years were gone. Lisa thought I had moved them. I thought she had used them for a special order. Neither of us asked. Now I understood. Those fabrics weren't just materials. They were the result of decades of careful selection, trades, preservation. I had once told Jacob they were never for sale, yet they had vanished. And in their place, I noticed the ring on Emily's hand. Too flashy. Not because it was beautiful, but because it didn't belong. It looked like something meant to be displayed, not lived with. I went back to Lisa. She looked up at me, questions in her eyes, but no pressure. I sat beside her. By then, the anger was gone. What remained was a familiar emptiness, the kind you feel when you realize you've placed your trust in the wrong place for far too long. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. She nodded. "Don't worry about me." I had heard those words my entire life, and that was exactly why I knew they couldn't be allowed to continue. From a distance, I saw Jacob laughing with his friends. Emily stood beside him, her hand on his arm. The posture of someone who owns what she's holding. They didn't look our way. In their world, what had just happened was already set aside, waiting for me to come back and sign so everything could return to its intended course. But I knew this much. Once something is exposed, even if only in one person's heart, there's no going back. I stood up. Lisa stood with me. As we walked back toward the center of the reception, I no longer moved like a man cornered. I walked like someone who had finally seen the entire picture. including the hidden stitches on the reverse side. And I knew that if I stayed silent one more time, it wouldn't just be the tailoring shop that was taken. What would be lost would be the final boundary between kindness and exploitation. We hadn't even stepped back into the light when Lisa stopped. She took my hand very gently, a familiar signal. I understood. Some things she had carried for too long, and tonight they were finally finding a way out. "Do you remember when my knee started hurting?" she asked. Her voice was low, steady, like she was recalling something far away. I nodded. I remembered it clearly. I also remembered telling her I would arrange a doctor's visit soon. Lisa looked toward the stage where Jacob and Emily were surrounded by congratulations. "I didn't go," she said. "I thought it would be better to save that money for our son's wedding." I turned to her. My hand tightened. I knew how she skipped meals, how she wore the same clothes for years, but I didn't know she had gone this far. She spoke slowly, each sentence carefully weighed. She had refused medical treatment. She had saved every small amount she could. She had set up a trust fund in Jacob's name, planning to give it to him on the day he started his own family. $200,000. Not a large sum for many people at this wedding, but it was a lifetime of restraint for her. I listened without interrupting. Every word felt like a needle, not sharp, but leaving a mark that stayed. I understood why she stayed silent when she was hurt. For her, as long as her child was safe, everything else was bearable. We took a few more steps. The music swelled. I saw Emily talking with a group of guests. She was smiling, confident, as if everything was unfolding exactly as planned. Then, casually, she let out a remark loud enough for those nearby to hear. "My in-laws are used to living off others," Emily said, half joking. "They like staying close to feel the luxury. I mean, who wouldn't?" A few soft laughs followed. No one objected. I stood just behind her. I heard every word. I looked at Lisa. She didn't lower her head, but I saw something in her eyes dim, like a lamp being turned down. I slipped my hand into my inner pocket. The check was there, neatly folded. I had brought it with me since morning out of habit. I had planned to present it at the most formal moment, a way to close a long chapter of parenthood. But those words changed everything. I didn't step onto the stage. I didn't raise the check. I stood at the edge of the light and slowly tore it apart. No rush. No drama. Just a clear, final decision. The paper split into small pieces, settling back into my pocket, as quietly as Lisa's sacrifices over the years. She looked at me. She didn't ask a thing. She only gave the slightest nod, an agreement without words. Jacob turned around just then. He saw us, and saw my hand finishing the motion. "What are you doing, Dad?" he asked, a hint of confusion in his voice. In his mind this evening still had a different shape. I didn't answer right away. I looked at my son, carefully. I saw a young man well-dressed, standing in the middle of luxury, without knowing what he was standing on. It struck me then. In trying to protect him, I had made sure he never faced the consequences of his choices. "What do you think we came here for?" I asked calmly, my voice no louder than the music. Jacob fell silent. Emily stepped in, placing her hand on his arm, claiming the moment. "We're here to start a new life," she said, "and you should understand some things need to be closed." I nodded. "That's right," I said. "Some things do need to be closed." In that moment, I knew I could no longer stand on the sidelines, not out of anger, but because the clarity had become impossible to ignore. I stepped up a few low stairs toward the stage, where a microphone waited. The host hesitated, then stepped aside. I took the microphone. No applause, no background music, just the quiet uncertainty of a waiting crowd. "My name is Luke," I said. "I'm the groom's father." A few nods. A few curious looks. I didn't explain. I didn't accuse. I spoke only what needed to be said, slowly, as if restoring order within myself. "My wife and I have worked as tailors our entire lives. We are not wealthy in the way you see tonight, but we have always believed that labor and self-respect are not things to be traded." I paused. I looked toward the front row where Lisa was standing. She met my eyes calm. Then I turned back to Jacob and Emily. If anyone believes that sacrifice is something to be taken lightly, then they have misunderstood us. The air grew heavy. I didn't need to say more. I set the microphone down. In that moment, I knew I had cut a thread that had been tied for far too long. Not to hurt anyone, but to prevent a much deeper tear. As I stepped down, Lisa came to me. She took my hand tighter than before. I felt her breathing steady again, and I understood that from this moment on, things would no longer revolve around keeping the peace, but around protecting what was still worth protecting. I didn't leave the stage right away. I didn't try to explain anything further. What I had just said wasn't meant to convince anyone. It was meant to put me back where I belonged in this story. When I stepped down, the host was still standing there, script in hand, frozen, unsure which part of the ceremony to continue. The music hadn't come back on. The silence lasted long enough for everyone to understand. Something had just broken. I reached into my pocket, not to find more words, but to find my phone. I had been waiting for this moment ever since I saw the brokerage firm's name on those papers earlier that afternoon. I dialed my attorney. No long explanation. Just one short sentence. Activate the morality clause. Right now. I ended the call. Lisa stood beside me. She didn't ask what I was doing. She simply stood there back straight, as if ready for whatever came next. Emily was the first to react. "You're taking this too far," she said, impatience creeping into her voice. "This is our wedding." I nodded. "I know." Jacob looked at me, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "What are you trying to do, Dad?" he asked. This time there was real worry in his voice. I didn't answer him directly. I looked around. Familiar faces. Unfamiliar ones. People who had come to celebrate, to network, to witness a beautiful story. In a few minutes, they would be witnessing a different one. From the main gate of the estate, a small group of people walked in. Dark suits. No visible badges. No dramatic entrance. They weren't in a hurry. They didn't look around. They walked straight ahead, like people who already knew exactly where they needed to stand. Not security. Not police. Just people who work with numbers and paperwork. A murmur spread through the crowd. Emily turned her eyes sharp. "What is this?" I stepped forward one pace enough for my voice to carry without a microphone. "Heritage Stitch," I said, "is not just a standalone shop the way you think." Jacob frowned. "What are you talking about? Many years ago, I continued, it was placed inside a broader legal structure, not to show off, but to protect." One of the men in dark suits stopped beside me and opened a folder. He didn't hand it to me. He simply stood there, steady, deliberate. I looked at Emily. For the first time, I saw a flash of something break through her control. "This estate," I said slowly, "this land, and the tailoring shop you demanded we sell, they all belong to the same ownership system." The air froze. A few guests turned to each other. Jacob stood rigid. "That's impossible," he said. "You and Mom live so simply." "I live simply," I corrected him. "Not because I lack options, but because I chose to." Emily stepped back. "Are you playing some kind of game with us?" I shook my head. "No," I gestured. The large screen behind the stage, usually reserved for memories, and photos lit up. Not wedding pictures. Numbers. Timelines. Carefully documented transactions. "I'm not saying this to humiliate anyone," I said, "but it's time things were called by their proper names." On the screen appeared a history of financial support. Debts quietly resolved. Assets temporarily held under alternate names. I didn't need to read it. I had lived with it for years. Jacob stared at the screen, then turned to me. "Dad, these things, they're the result of me not knowing how to say no sooner," I said. Emily started talking fast, her words tumbling over each other. "Those amounts. We'll pay them back. We just need more time." "I gave you time," I replied. "A lot of time." One of the men in dark suits stepped forward, his voice low and precise. He spoke about the revocation of usage rights on several assets held under the corporate structure. No shouting. No threats. Just a notification. Jacob's breath caught. "The apartment, the car, are no longer under your control," I said. "From the moment you decided to pressure your mother into signing away what she protected her entire life." Emily turned toward Jacob. For the first time, I saw the calculations between them fall out of sync. She opened her mouth, then closed it. "I'm not doing this to punish anyone," I said, my voice unchanged. "I'm doing it because there are boundaries that cannot be crossed without consequences." A security guard moved closer when Emily's voice rose. No one touched her. The presence alone was enough to signal that this celebration was no longer under her command. Jacob lowered his head. He didn't kneel. He didn't beg. But the collapse was visible in his shoulders. I looked at my son, and in that moment I felt no victory. Only a lesson, delivered far too late. I turned to Lisa. "Let's go," I said. She nodded. We walked away through a crowd, still trying to understand what had just happened. No one stopped us. No one called out. As we reached the steps, I heard the music start again behind us. Misplaced, awkward wrong. I didn't turn back. What needed to be exposed had been exposed, and whatever came next no longer belonged to me. We left the estate as the sky shifted into deep indigo. No one called after us. No footsteps followed. I could hear the river brushing against the shore, steady and calm, as if the world was moving on in its own rhythm, untouched by what had just happened behind us. Lisa sat quietly beside me in the car. Her head rested against the seat, her eyes on the window. I didn't ask what she was thinking. Sometimes peace comes from not needing to say anything at all. As the car pulled away, I felt something unfamiliar and comforting. Lighter, as if I had finally set down a weight I'd been carrying for far too long. We didn't go back to the tailoring shop. Not because I had turned my back on it, but because I wanted it to rest, free from bargaining and pressure. Instead, I drove toward the sea. The road was long and quiet, dotted with sparse lights and the scent of salt in the air. Lisa rolled down the window and took a deep breath. She smiled, just a little. The seaside house appeared after the final curve. No grandeur, no excess. Just a place meant for two older people to slow down. I parked, stepped out first, and opened the door for Lisa, the way I always had. She took my hand as we walked onto the porch, where the warm yellow light was already on. In the days that followed, I finished what remained to be done. No rush, no bitterness. Heritage Stitch was transformed into a community space. The old machines stayed. The untouched fabrics were displayed. I wanted it to tell a different story. Not about money, but about craft, patience, and stitches that endure. Lisa returned to the shop a few times in a new role. Not to sell, but to teach. She sat by the window, showing younger hands how to hold a needle, how to listen to fabric. I stood behind her, watching, and understood something clearly. Some values don't need contracts to survive. They stand on their own when placed where they belong. Jacob called me once. His voice was subdued, direct. He spoke about rearranging his life, about past choices. I listened. I didn't offer advice. I said only one thing. Learn to take responsibility. The call ended quietly. No tension, no promises, but enough to begin a healthy distance. Emily never reached out. I didn't try to find her. Everyone walks their own path, and not every path needs to keep crossing. I learned that letting go is not failure. Sometimes it's the only way to preserve what still matters. In the evenings, Lisa and I sat on the porch. The sea stretched out before us, asking nothing, judging nothing. We talked about small things. Tomorrow's breakfast, the book she was reading, the way the wind was about to change. I realized how long it had been since I'd lived inside conversations that small. Some people ask if I regret it. I've thought about that question many times. If there's any regret, it's that I stayed silent for too long. But that same silence taught me when to finally stop. I'm not proud of what was exposed. I'm simply relieved that everything was put back where it belonged. I once believed keeping the peace was the most important thing. Now I understand this. Peace only matters when it doesn't require you to trade away your self-respect. Some relationships need to be cut cleanly, not to hurt anyone, but to keep the fabric of life from tearing further. When night fully settled, Lisa placed her hand over mine. "We're okay now," she said. I nodded. I knew she meant it. Out there, the sea kept whispering. I thought about needles and thread, about how a well-timed cut can save an entire piece of fabric. And I understood that real wealth isn't what you own, but knowing when to say, enough, when kindness is mistaken for weakness. That's where my story ends. No noise, no victory. Just two older people choosing freedom, choosing calm, and choosing to protect what had sustained them their whole lives. Thank you for staying until the final moments of this story. If it gave you something worth reflecting on, please like, subscribe, and share so others can listen and understand as well. The final message is simple. Kindness needs boundaries, and self-respect is the foundation of every lasting relationship. I wish you the clarity to protect what truly matters in your own life.